So we're here today with Paul Todd, the Business Administrator of East Windsor Regional School District. Thank you for joining us, Paul. We're going to talk about just capital projects, construction, planning and budgeting for them. And I know, Paul, we've been working together for a number of years at this point, and really started from the ground up with your district, and started with a solid framework. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and start with how did you start to plan and scope, because you really did start with the first steps that you should take as a business administrator, I believe.
Right. Thanks for having me this morning, Tammy. I'm really excited to be talking about some of the great successes that we've had here in East Windsor Regional School District. We started off with you guys. I remember interviewing Scott and Marcus. I believe it was winter break 2016. It was kind of a hurried time for us. We were in the need for a pretty radical, a deep invasive review of our facility projects, not knowing really where we stood. I'd been in the district for less than a year. So I think the process that we agreed on pretty quickly was to do an entire district review of our facilities. And that was with you guys, myself, our buildings and grounds team. And we also looped in there the building administrator and also the maintenance person who was assigned to that school. So we felt that we had everyone at the table, and I think that's first and foremost, that everyone kind of gets the same information or is involved in the process at the same time. So pretty much we walked each building and we started developing a project list. Each district is required to have a long-range facility plan, but ours was pretty old and aged. So basically we started to develop a new one for us. And we started developing just projects just by walking and talking to individuals. And I think by the time we were done going through all 6 schools, we probably had about 100 projects listed. After that, we kind of went through and did a prioritization of those projects, with top level being the most important. And I think we had about 3 phases of those that we would break up into different phases so we could tackle the most important problems. So that was really the start of the process. And I think that really gave us the baseline for what we needed to do here as far as budget planning.
So I know from our perspective, and you did touch on it, we went through that master planning phase to really understand holistically as a district what needed to happen in the facilities. And you did say it was inclusive of not only facility staff, but the people inside the buildings, teaching in the buildings at all different levels. Then priorities. How have you seen that first shot that we took at priorities?
You know, when you take a look back and when you look at those tier 1 projects that we laid out, there's a high congruity of what we planned to what we did. As always, and I think this COVID situation is kind of proving the point that there are going to be times where projects rise to the surface that you didn't plan, and that's okay. So 5 years ago, when we took a look at our HVAC system and we realized that we needed some work, but the COVID situation has definitely elevated that now to the forefront, where that's probably the most important thing. So really the most important thing with project planning is that changes do occur, and that's okay. To me, it's always important though, when those new projects come up, that you're then trading that off for other projects that need to be done. And I think that's just a natural part of the process, and that's an important part of the process. So that would be an example of a new issue that would emerge that you'd have to recognize and then work into facility planning.
So there is no penalty when we put all these projects in your long-range facilities plan. There is no penalty if you do them out of order. We will recommend to you and suggest to you priorities. If there are some things that are beyond their lifetime that are not functioning, obviously they will take a greater priority. If they are a safety hazard, that would take a greater priority. How do you then deal with it on the financial end of things? Because you do have set amount of money. If we are looking at projects 5-10 years out, as a business administrator, what do you do financially for that?
So just to go back to the point that you just made, really the only penalty is not to plan. I think I know some of my colleagues, and even talking to some design professionals, it's not uncommon for some of my colleagues to call up their design professionals in May and say, hey, we need to get this project going, and that's way too late. Here in East Windsor, we started planning next summer's projects this past September and October. I mean, that's how far ahead you have to be. So to plan our projects, we kind of have things laid out for the next 5 years. And then when it comes time for budget planning, we take a look at what we're going to do the next year. And then really once the budget is set, we just kind of wait for a few months, get through the summer projects. And really when we get to the fall, we start planning for the next year. And I think that really is the most important part. Developing your specs, really digging into what needs to be done, really analyzing the problem. And I think when you give yourself enough time, you're going to be successful because you have a chance to flesh out all the problems, talk about it 2 or 3 different times as opposed to once for 15 minutes. And then you might have missed a few critical things or critical functions that you needed to repair or upgrade. So for example, we have some projects that we're doing next summer. We've already started planning on. We're planning to be out to bid in December with hopefully some awards. I was hoping for January, but it looks at this point, February, which is probably even a month to a month and a half advance from where we were last year. And I think when you look at some of the successes that we've had, it's because of that advanced planning. And I think we're just putting ourselves in a much better situation for next summer's projects by doing this.
So even if we break down some of what we're doing with you on a project basis, we're starting to do some of those as smaller master plans. So we'll take one of your elementary schools, and there was a large number of things that we were looking at doing within that one school. Well, we ended up taking, rather than a big chunk of work and taking off too much than we could handle, we did a master plan within that school and determined everything that needed to happen. And we set smaller priorities. So it's smaller steps that were feasible. We had something that was too large of a scope to successfully construct over the summer, that too much of financial to fit into your budget for the 1 year. And part of what we ended up having to work together on was making sure that we could phase this project to meet the needs and scope the project to meet the needs to fit within your budget for the year, as well as the time frame that we're allowed, because we can't go and take over your classrooms and create a construction site for your children to try to learn in. There's enough difficulty that we've got to overcome these days with education in a school building as it is. So there's parameters, and I think sizing that project was key. And like you said, we're spending that time now to make sure we do that properly.
Right. So after you have your master plan, then we start developing master plans within the master plans, which are project specific. So the example that you just gave, one of our elementary schools, which, and it's not unusual for districts to have older schools and have different purposes throughout its lifetime. So the elementary school that you are talking about, once upon a time, was the original Hightstown High School. So it definitely, when you're in different parts of the school, have different feels to them. And there's also different infrastructure concerns due to the age. So just take, toilet rooms, for example. Like, you just can't come in the course of 1 year and just tear out all the toilet rooms and leave your school without a facility during the summer, because you still have staff and students in there. So it's really important to take in consideration the needs of the district and the needs of the school and the purpose that it's serving. So usually when we do those smaller master plans, we do the same thing that we do for the larger master plans. So we actually have the school building administrator engaged in each one of those meetings, because they're going to bring a certain perspective, which is really important to that master planning schedule, and just insights that we need to have that otherwise would be missed.
And one of the items that you started to touch on was getting out to bid early. And you and I have had those discussions over the past few years. We want to make sure that we get your projects out to bid so we can get good competitive bids. Following the public bidding procedures, we do get those phone calls from clients that call us in March or May to put a project out to bid. At that point, contractors usually have their summer work set. So projects that'll go out to bid that late, you'll get very high costs on stuff that goes out that late. So we do try to get out early. Some of the other things that we have to weigh in is lead times of some of the products. So mechanical units have been long lead times. Windows, lockers, we're struggling with some lockers and unfortunately COVID delays, which nobody could have predicted for this past summer. But there are certain things that I know you rely on us to know the market and to know what we're working with. That's also part of some of the things that we have to take into account when we work out budgets for you, to make sure that the scope that we define fits in your budget. We need to predict what's happening in the market with tariffs and trucking. There's been some years where there's been increases in costs because of oil, that trucking has been there, has been increased delays due to trucking. And that's stuff that you look to us and our expertise to account for when we recommend how to break down these projects into feasible scopes of work.
Yeah, if I could just jump off, you made a really good point about long lead times, and just to illustrate a project that we had in the not so distant past, we had a window renovation project here at Hightstown High School. Some of those windows were dating back to the early 70s and really needed to be replaced. Hearing some horror stories from some of my colleagues where they were waiting 20 plus weeks for delivery of items. We got out early. And actually what we did for our vendors, we told them that if the items came in early, we would provide them a space in our transportation yard. They could park a trailer in there. And it just so happens those windows came in, I think it was early June, which is great because a lot of our colleagues were not getting that. So we had everything on hand. So as soon as the students and staff walked in, our contractors were able to walk right in, and they had all the most important part, they had all of their products on hand ready for installation. So I think that's going to be a key as we move forward, as we try to battle all these COVID delays everyone is facing, is that we're going to try to get out early. We're going to ask individuals to get as much product here before the end of school as possible. We'll find a place on our campus. We have some spaces where we can provide spaces for them to hold on to their items. And that way, when they're ready for construction, everything's here and we're not, listening and waiting on all those delays that you just mentioned as far as transportation, potential tariff problems. You never know who the president's going to be in a fight with tomorrow, so you never know how that's going to affect you. So we try to put ourselves and our district in the best position as possible.
The earlier isn't always better for bidding, and I know you and I have had that conversation as well, because one of the other things that we need to account for is your oil prices. So paving, you and I talked about was one thing that you did want to wait until earlier in the spring to go out and bid, because stable oil prices, rather than having the contractor try to predict what was going to happen. So that's all part of using your professionals for what they know. And Paul, I appreciate that, because we'll have those conversations, and I think you do respect that, and I think we work well together. The other, I think, point that helps in the success is you do bring us in early. It's not a last minute call. It's not a last minute, we need to do this. I think that you use us as an extension of your buildings and grounds team in some cases. And is that working for you?
It's working out very well. Yes. No, I mean, you guys have definitely become part of the extended East Windsor regional family, and we really appreciate the expertise that you guys bring to the table for us. Our project meetings are really large. So there's no ego in there. I know some of my colleagues, they sit in the project meeting by themselves and they cut everyone out. They cut their buildings and grounds team out. They're cutting other administrators out. And to me, that's never been helpful. I always believe that everyone should get the same information at the same time. And the larger the group you have, I think the better you have of problem shooting things. So no, we definitely bring the expertise that you have, and very happy to be working with you for, it's going on 5 years now.
It is. As much as we do have our hands on the pulse and try to have our hands on the pulse of what's happening in the industry, what's expected to happen in the industry, sometimes we don't know. Nobody was going to predict what happened with COVID and the delays that we have with COVID. Unfortunately, you're still waiting for a product or two. We have to be prepared to deal with the unknown. Safety and occupancy of the schools. We continue to work with you to make sure that we can get your kids in when your kids come back, that it's a safe environment. And that's really the goal, is successful projects, safe environments, and moving, continuing to move forward and work with you.
Absolutely.
Any other words of advice for newer business administrators, even board members, to come in and the steps to successfully plan projects, because you've had some summers with a lot of undertaking on capital work?
We've been very busy, and I think, due to our buildings and grounds team and working with SSP, I think what happens is every year we take that next step and we realize that we hit it out of the park, and we're encouraged by that. And every year we kind of turn it up a notch, which is kind of always good to hear. So I guess as far as recommendation, in this time, as we say here in East Windsor, the situation is fluid. And I would just tell everyone that just to kind of go along with that ride. It's okay. Things are going to change, and that's okay. Things are not always going to go your way, and that's okay. The most important thing in my role, a lot of times I say I have really the most easiest job in the district, and people laugh when I say that, because really my job is to inform other people what's going on. And I feel if I keep other people informed, they're very appreciative of that. And when those changes do occur, everyone's expecting it, and everyone knows where we are and where we're heading. It's when you start surprising people and they start questioning things, that's when it becomes problematic. So yes, definitely be flexible and fluid, especially in these crazy times.
Excellent. I don't know if we have any questions, if anybody wants to unmute and jump in with any questions, or not seeing anybody jump to it. So
It means we probably answered everything.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Paul. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you land safely off of that drone.
Right.
And we will be chatting with you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tammy. Have a good day.
Thank you.